Hello, everybody. Welcome to this 5th Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, held today, the 10th of November, 2020. On behalf of ICLEI Africa, I would like to welcome all of you to this Congress. It's hosted in partnership with the city of Kigali and the government of Rwanda. I would like to also thank the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa for making the session possible for us. In terms of introduction, we have a variety of speakers lined up for us. We have a representative from the AFD, UNFCCC, Sustainable Energy Africa, the municipality of Maputo. We have an NGO also from Kenya and Sierra Leone. So I will not go into an elaborate presentation in terms of the speakers at this point in time. I will introduce each one of the speakers as they come on the platform. Over to you, Nachi.
Good afternoon, good morning, good day, everyone. My name is Nachi Majwe from ICLEI Africa. Thank you very much, Lebu, for the introduction. So I will quickly be taking you through how to use the platform and then provide a quick overview about ICLEI Africa, as well as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa who have made this session possible. So in terms of how to use the platform, the session does have live interpretation, and we invite you to listen in your language of choice. So to find the options, please look at the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your screen and click on the interpretation icon to choose your language. There are 3 languages offered: French, English, as well as Portuguese. You also have the option to mute the original audio if the speaker is too loud and it is interrupting your ability to hear. So just make sure that you mute the original audio to be able to hear properly. And as Lebu mentioned, as an overview, we'll have 6 speakers from a range of backgrounds, and the webinar will consist of live as well as pre-recorded inputs, as well as a video that will be played at the end, and we'll have lots of time for discussions halfway through as well as at the end to take your questions, and then the panelists will then respond. If you have any technical problems, please use the email that is displayed on the screen, or go to support desk at the top of your screen where you can then get assistance. And please note the session will be recorded, so you will be able to listen to it again at a later stage. I would really like to encourage active participation during the session. So please type your questions for the speakers in the Q&A box or in the chat provided. And the speakers will then at a later stage respond to those questions. So this is the Embedding Gender in Climate Action session as mentioned, which is convened by ICLEI Africa in partnership with COMSA, Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa. And then I will then move on to, Lebu has already introduced the speaker, so I'll move right straight into ICLEI Africa's presentation. So just for those of you that are not fully familiar with ICLEI Africa, or well, with ICLEI, which is a global network of more than 1,750 local and regional governments that are committed to sustainable urban development. And we're active in over 100 countries, and our work really stems on influencing sustainability policies and driving local action across our 5 pathways, which I will talk about a little bit in the next slide. But we have a team of experts in 22 offices countrywide that work with subnational governments on peer-to-peer exchanges, partnerships, as well as capacity building to create systemic change for urban sustainability. So moving on to the next slide in relation to ICLEI's 5 pathways. These are low emissions, nature-based, equitable, people-centered, resilient, as well as circular development. And these pathways are really designed to create systemic change. And they are a framework for designing integrated solutions that can balance the patterns of human life and the built and natural environments. And what ICLEI has done as part of our work and really cross-cutting across all these pathways is that we have launched the ICLEI Gender Action League, which is part of the reason we're having this solutions room today, to be able to understand what the city's needs are in terms of capacity building when it comes to gender. So that's why as ICLEI Africa, this session was particularly important. And we are co-hosting it with the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, as I mentioned, which on the next slide, you will then see that COMSA is the regional chapter of the Global Covenant of Mayors. And currently we have over 200 cities in Sub-Saharan Africa that are committed to making ambitious climate change commitments and sharing good practice. And across the different pillars, or the 3 pillars that COMSA is working on, at the center of it is gender mainstreaming. And in this session, we'll then be able to understand what the status is when it comes to gender from the different experts, but particularly from the cities as well, to get an understanding of what your gender consideration needs are, or some of the challenges, and how COMSA can then be able to assist in terms of ensuring that climate change, gender is embedded in climate action planning. And then moving on to the last slide, we'll then be talking a bit more, as I mentioned, in terms of getting an idea of what the different needs of the cities are. And that will then feed into ICLEI Africa's Gender Action League, as well as COMSA's capacity building plan moving forward. So with that, thank you very much. And I'd like to hand back to Lebo. But before I do that, I'm just going to ask that we do a quick poll, which will pop up on your screen, and you can please answer the question, which is, does your city have a gender mainstreaming policy or strategy? And that will shortly come up on the screen, and you can choose the option, yes, your city does have a gender mainstreaming policy or strategy. If it doesn't, you can choose no. Or if you don't know, you can select that option of I don't know. So we'll just give it a few seconds to see what the responses are. Okay, so we have received quite a number of responses. And it's interesting to note, and this we'll also discuss at a later stage, that about 75% of the participants, they said the response is I don't know, and 25% said yes, their city does have a gender mainstreaming policy or strategy. So thank you very much. Back to you, Lebo.
Thanks, Naji. You know, we appreciate the whole background, the history around the relationship between the Covenant of Mayors, ICLEI, the LOCS, the whole concept, and why we are here. Our first speaker actually is Alice Janssen. She's an investment officer at AFD. She's going to be talking to us about the following questions. What is gender and why does it matter? How can gender consideration be incorporated into climate action plans? What knowledge and capacity building gaps exist in gender mainstreaming, and how can the AFD assist to overcome this? Reminder to all of you, there is interpretation as Nachi indicated. If you are not an English speaker, so you can switch on to the relevant interpretation that suits your needs. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Lebu. Thank you, everyone. Good day to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. As Lebu mentioned, so I will first start answering the question, what is gender and why does it matter? Yeah, thank you. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I first wanted to start with a very short and brief definition from the WHO on the gender concept, so that we all have the same basis for discussion, even though I'm sure that a lot of you already know this definition. So gender refers to the roles, the behaviors, the activities, the attributes, and the opportunities that a society will consider appropriate for girls and boys and for women and men. And in that sense, gender is different from the biological sex, as it is a social and cultural construct. It is important to understand that gender is a dynamic concept, and what that means is that it is embedded in other structural relationships, which I will speak about a little bit later, and that all gender attributes, the gender roles, the gender opportunities will change according to a geographic location, according to an ethnicity, to a religion, to a socioeconomic status. And I think this is important to understand, because that means that gender can evolve in time and space, and that it is not standing still in a society. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And regarding to the question, why does gender matters? I wanted to make it a bit more specific in transforming it into why it is important to take gender into account when we speak about climate change. And I think here there are two different elements that we need to take into account. The first one is that gender issues and climate change are both crucial issues, but they are also transversal issues, which means that each of them are defined as a sustainable development goal action, which is the number 13, and each of them can be related to another SDGs, which is going to be more sectorial, such as access to clean water and sanitation, or zero hunger, for example. So we can all see the links between climate change and access to clean water, and we can all see the link between gender and access to water. But what we have difficulties finding or understanding is that both these transversal issues of climate action and gender have underlying links and ties between each other, especially when we bring them back to, for example, access to clean water and sanitation. The second element that I wanted to mention is that we also have to understand the role and the impacts of climate change on gender issues. Because in the climate action, or in the fight against climate change, we have to shine a light on the gender differentiated vulnerabilities of men and women against climate change, and the gender differentiated impacts of individuals regarding climate change, because both men and women will not be affected in the same way or in the same manner, because from the beginning, their roles and their opportunities and their attributes in a society are different and are also unequal. I then wanted to go a little bit further by introducing the concept of intersectionality, which basically states that some individuals find themselves at the intersection of different burdens or different discrimination that are most likely to be worsened by climate change. Because more often than not, people are vulnerable to climate change, not only because they are women or men, but also because they might be poor, or because they might be discriminated for X or Y or Z reason. Thank you. I think you can move to the next slide. Yeah. Thank you. So this leads me to the second point about how gender consideration can be incorporated into climate action plans. And I want to speak about the concept of the just transition, which is a concept that emerged in the 1980s in North America. And this concept is also at the heart of many discussions here in South Africa, where I am based. And I believe that we have to emphasize the need not only for a just transition, but also for a gender just transition. And the concept does not come from me. But we need to make sure that the transition is used as a tool to fight not only climate change, but also gender inequalities. And I want to give you a quick example here. I will try to be brief. The AFD is currently working in partnership with ICLEI and the Steve Tshothe local municipality in Mpumalanga in South Africa. And we want to support the Steve local municipality, because the local municipality is in the context of an economic reorientation, because it's also being vulnerable to climate change, like many other municipalities or localities everywhere in the world. And we are trying to make an analysis of the workforce, of the labor force in this municipality, but we want to push the analysis further by bringing a gender analysis into the picture, because when you speak about economic reorientation, you must understand that some people are more vulnerable than others, and that includes women, for example, that are mostly represented in the informal sector, or at least more than men. And I wanted to emphasize here again the need to take into account, as I said, the intersections and the different burdens that are faced by different individuals. Because if we consider that women are going to be impacted differently than men by climate change and that they might be more vulnerable, we need to think about which women are we talking about, and why are these women more vulnerable? Is it because they are poor? That's most likely. And we must also question ourselves about what can be done so that the inequalities are resolved, not only at the gender level between men and women and between girls and boys, but also at the social and economic level, so that no one is left behind and so that everyone can have the same access to opportunities and to a better life. And this will only be achieved if we include and if we involve the most vulnerable in the decision-making processes. Thank you. I think you can move to the next slide. Thank you. Then the last question was regarding the gaps in knowledge and capacity building that exists in the mainstreaming process, and what can the AFD do to assist and to overcome this? I think there is a strong need or a necessity for dialogue between different stakeholders. And I'm speaking here about the stakeholders that are involved in climate change or climate action, and the stakeholders that are involved in gender issues. And the International Labour Organization mentions that we have expertise, we have strong expertise on climate change, we have strong expertise on gender issues, but it's difficult to find expertise that are going to bring these two topics together, the topics of climate change and of gender issues, and to bring expertise that are going to allow cross-cutting interventions that will not only tackle climate change, but also gender inequalities. And I think our role as a DFI and as the French Development Agency is to bring the expertise and to question these two issues that are also very important to us. But we have to integrate this expertise over a long period of time. We have great tools that are diagnosis or rapid assessment that we can use, obviously, but these tools are also limited because they take a picture of gender issues or climate change issues at a certain point of time or at a certain in a certain context. But as I said in my introduction, gender is a dynamic concept. It evolves in space and in time, so we need to integrate it over a long period of time. And the idea behind all that is to build the capacity for different stakeholders to have the reflex to integrate gender issues at every step of the way and from the very beginning of the different processes to fight climate change. And what we can provide at the AFD, and I will finish my presentation on this, go through different tools so we can provide technical cooperation, capacity building, which can be on hard skills or on soft skills, which will allow the integration of the gender issues or gender components into climate action plans. We can also provide research and analysis, which is what we are discussing currently with ICLEI and with Steve local municipality. And we can also do diagnosis exercises because, as I mentioned, these diagnoses are also very important tools. And the idea is to obviously reinforce gender components and gender analysis in each and every one of our climate actions. Thank you very much. I hope I kept time.
Thanks, Alice. You have set the bar on high. You did keep to the time. Thank you very much. Just to say that we won't be entertaining questions at this point in time. There's a slot for a question and answer session, but the participants are also encouraged to post questions on the chat. So I'll periodically be checking the chat as we go. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker. We will then reconvene towards the later parts of the program. So I want to just introduce Fleur Newman, who is from the UNCCC. She's focused on gender focal point and focal point for women. She will also be responding to a set of predetermined questions around the UNFCCC's Gender Action Plan. And she's going to share from her own experience what are the capacity building gaps that are needed to ensure gender mainstreaming. She's going to share reflections from the regional workshop on integrating gender into national climate actions. And lastly, she will also share with us what can subnational governments learn from the gender mainstreaming processes by national governments. Over to you, Fleur. You have 10 minutes. Alice has set the bar on high, as I said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lebu, and thank you also to ICLEI Africa and partners for the opportunity to join today's Solution Room event. Next slide, please. Turning first, I'm going to turn first to the UNFCCC process. So this is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's the intergovernmental process that at which climate decisions are made. And you can see from this slide that there's been a progression, and this sort of goes to the point that's just been made about how gender evolves over time and in different places. There's been a progression from the first mention of gender-related issues in a decision in 2001, focusing on the need to increase the representation of women in international climate decision-making processes, up to last year, a decision at COP25, where parties agreed a 5-year enhanced Lima work program on gender and its gender action plan. This evolution represents a growing understanding by parties or countries to the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement of the relevance and importance of gender considerations in improving the effectiveness and fairness of climate policy and action. In the COP25 decision, parties recognise that the impacts of climate change are differentiated on women and men, and that this is owes to historical and current gender inequalities and multidimensional factors, and is often more pronounced in developing countries and for local communities and Indigenous peoples. And we've just had a little bit more detail on that point about it being differentiated and the intersectionality of gender with other factors. The decision also acknowledges the imperatives of a just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs, and the need to take gender considerations into account when transitioning to low carbon, climate resilient economies and societies. Next, please. The Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan is made up of a work programme and, as an annex, the Gender Action Plan. The work programme includes open-ended, long-term actions, such as an invitation to parties to nominate a national gender and climate change focal point, as well as ongoing regular activities for the Secretariat, for whom I work. The Gender Action Plan is organised by 5 priority areas under which different activities are grouped. The 5 priority areas are based on categories that were identified in over 55 previous decisions under the UNFCCC, including decisions related to the Paris Agreement. These priority areas have been identified as critical in achieving effective gender-responsive climate policy and action. Next slide. The first priority area of the Gender Action Plan is capacity building, knowledge management and communication, and I'll come back to this later. The second, gender balance, participation and women's leadership. And there is a need to continue to have a focus in this area because there has been little change in the 18 years since the first decision identified the need to increase women's representation in climate decision making. The third is coherence, and this means coherence across the UNFCCC process, such as climate finance, technology development and transfer, capacity building, and the many other topics that are managed under the international process. It also means identifying synergies and opportunities for collaboration across the UN system. The fourth area is gender responsive implementation and means of implementation. Means of implementation in this context is, again, capacity building, technology development and transfer, and climate finance. And finally, monitoring and reporting. This is also a critical area, particularly under the UNFCCC process, where reporting and peer review is a key mechanism for raising ambition on climate policy and action. Next slide, please. One of the activities under the fourth priority area on gender responsive implementation was a request to the Secretariat to organise a workshop on the integration of gender considerations in national policies, plans, strategies and action. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Secretariat changed what would otherwise have been an in-person session and organised these sessions virtually and on a regional basis to facilitate greater participation and to enable us to provide remote simultaneous interpretation. So originally the workshop would have been held in Bonn during the subsidiary body session in June over 1 or 2 days. Instead, we provided 5 regional workshops, each 4 hours long, which included breakout sections with smaller group discussions and interactive tools for participation. And whereas we would have probably had we would have had 120 participants in person, we had 962 registrations, and then following that, over 1,570 YouTube views. The workshop was organised around 3 themes that have been identified as key components of achieving gender responsive climate policy and action. These included sex desegregated data and gender analysis, institutional arrangements and cooperation mechanisms, and policy alignment and coherence. Next slide, please. So then what could subnational governments learn from gender mainstreaming at the national level? This slide illustrates the components that have been identified through a pilot being implemented by UNDP as part of its global support program, which supports countries in developing their national climate plans, or nationally determined contributions as they're known, NDCs under the Paris Agreement. The pilot is supporting countries in integrating gender in their NDCs. 10 countries originally included in the pilot include Ghana, Kenya, Lebanon, Uganda, and Zambia, and have been joined by 6 or 7 other countries, including Cote d'Ivoire, who had already made a decision to integrate gender and are benefiting from the peer exchange within the pilot group. The early learning from this pilot is that these 4 stages or elements of planning and implementation all provide opportunities for integrating gender considerations. And you may notice that there are similarities between this diagram and the agenda for the regional workshop that I just spoke about. That's because we are building on lessons learned. In relation to national analysis and consultations, this is where sex desegregated data and gender analysis play their first important role. This is where countries can identify priority sectors, vulnerable groups, and potential gender gaps that could worsen if attention isn't paid to addressing them in climate interventions. Women's access to public transport, for example, or participation in decisions on gender sources and distribution, or issues of access to land or finance that inhibit the ability to become to be resilient to climate change or to contribute to climate solutions. The second part of this is consultations that take place in planning the NDCs. It is critical that these involve subnational governments and also that the planning is informed by a diverse range of stakeholders, ensuring that local communities are able to contribute their ideas, raise concerns and challenges, and understand the broader aims of the NDC would allow for a whole of society approach to the transition that is needed. Coordination mechanisms that also include women and gender ministries and local government, potentially also gender focal points in different line ministries such as finance, energy or agriculture. On policy alignment, there are many other international and national frameworks that are relevant for gender and climate change, including things such as the SDGs, and it makes sense to build on infrastructure and funding that already exists. Finally, monitoring and evaluation is needed to understand plans. Next slide, please. Next. So this is a diagram of the National Adaptation Plan, another national policy, and it includes all of the same elements and a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. Unsurprising to us, the gender composition of the participants of the workshop was predominantly female, but we did notice that there was a much higher percentage of male participants than we would get normally in person. And there's also definitely an interest on the topic from the African region. Next slide, please. And this slide just explains a little bit at a very high level all of the different capacity building that is required. As has already been mentioned, gender knowledge and climate knowledge needs to be across both. So climate people need to know gender knowledge, gender people need to know climate knowledge. It also needs to be at all levels, international, national, regional and local, and it needs to be context specific in relation to priority sectors. Next slide, please. And we have, one of the things about the Gender Action Plan is that it involves a diverse group of stakeholders, and that includes cities and subnational governments. And we look forward to future collaboration and participation from members of ICLEI and partners in the implementation of the Gender Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. You also made it. I think it's quite apparent from your presentation that the focus on change is not something that only recently became focus. According to your timeline, it started way back in 2000. We still have not. I suppose us having this conversation will get us some way in terms of achieving tangible mainstreaming of these issues and making sure that the voice of women is taken into consideration and then vulnerable totality. Because as Alice indicated, you could compromise based on your social economic status. So as we deliberate on how we are going to make good on the Paris Agreement, I think those are very important considerations to take forward. Thank you very much. I need to usher in our next speaker, Ms. Shengiwe Khadebe. She is working for Sustainable Energy Africa. She doesn't have a presentation, but she will be talking through the following points. She is currently the Gender and Energy Professional at Sustainable Energy Africa. She will be talking on from her own experience. How can energy access and climate action planning contribute to gender equality? How can cities ensure that their climate plans and actions are facilitated? What would you say are some of the capacity buildings for cities to ensure climate action? I know Sustainable Energy Africa is also working with a lot of cities, so it would be quite interesting to hear their perspective on these questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Lewu. Hopefully I didn't miss anything towards the end. I didn't hear you clearly. Afternoon, everyone, and good morning if it's morning on your side. I'm Slenyo Khatebe, and as Lebo said, I work for Sustainable Energy Africa. Starting with the first question on my experience on test, I think I'll touch my own personal experience of how can energy access and contribute to gender equality. Is that I grew up in the my early years. I grew up in the rural areas where we collected wood from the forest, which meant that we went to school and we came back from school and either went to fetch water from the borehole and then came back home and then went to fetch firewood and then started cooking, which then meant that you only had about 30 minutes to do homework at home because sunset will start and we had to reserve the amount of energy we had. So we used candle lights for lighting. So we had to reserve the candles so that we were able to use them for the rest of the month. So studying wasn't part of that. We wasn't considered in that. So you had to study in the afternoon, and if you missed that opportunity between your chores, it meant that you didn't study. And as a young girl at the time, chores like fetching water and cooking and cleaning and fetching firewood were placed on us as young girls. So that also meant that we had less opportunities to study than the boys. While we did attend school, it meant that we had less opportunity to get home and understand further what we learned at school. So I then moved to the city where there was lighting, where I didn't have to go and fetch water and all of those things. And that made a considerable difference in my life because then I had more time to study further. I could sleep at 10 p.m. and study further. Probably one of the reasons why I am able to speak right now. That I continue to live in the rural areas. I'm not certain of how my future will have turned out. And unfortunately, for many of the girls, and I speak of the girls that I grew up with, some of them unfortunately didn't have this experience. So they then weren't able to further their studies, have remained in the rural areas, and they are still farming and they are still fetching wood and did not have the same opportunities that I have. So providing clean energy to people in urban areas, in the rural areas, is essential, not just because they're able to have lighting, but the fact that lighting on its own is that it then means that they can study at night. It then means women can work at night. A lot of women are afraid to work at night because it's dark at night. It means that when you have energy, you have access to information, you are able to charge your own phone and connect with the rest of the world. With the COVID-19 having hit us right now, it means that clinics are able to run and have vaccinations for people. They are able to treat people well. If there's no clean energy in that area, it means that nurses are treating people in the dark and they do not have storage to store their medication. This is why when cities start thinking about climate action plans, they have to consider these things, and they have to consider them not just by thinking of them, but also including the women. We all know that in most cases, especially when you talk about your energy, water, infrastructure, or transport, those spaces are quite male-dominated. So cities need to start, when they engage around climate action planning, ensure that in the room there's enough women represented, so that both men and women can share their lived experiences. When you talk about energy, both men and women have different experiences around how they experience energy. So we need those equal voices. But it's outside of just having all of those people in the room, is that women tend to be quieter sometimes. So one needs to be able to allow a space where women are put aside and they engage on these issues, and men are put aside and engage on these issues, and then put together to then see where there are the differences as well. So for me, I thought for cities wanting to appropriately include gender into the action plans, it's important for them to consider the following. There should be gender balance in planning and decision-making bodies to get lived experiences of both men and women. Moreover, the equal and meaningful participation of women and men should be ensured in processes and consultations with stakeholders. It is therefore necessary that special provisions and arrangements are made to ensure the equal participation of women, to enable them to articulate their needs, preferences, and opinions. My apologies, I then realized that there are people, there are translators, and I need to slow down, so I'm starting to slow down. I apologize that I was quite quick in the beginning. We need to involve gender experts. The truth is, a lot of people don't understand, sort of overlook that gender issues when they talk about climate actions plans. So cities therefore need to include, bring in gender experts so that they are able to address these problems clearly. So we need to involve gender experts in planning procedures, as well as awareness raising and addressing the gender dimensions of climate change. To address women and gender sensitivity and inclusive, we need to involve languages that both men and women understand. And the channels that are used to communicate need to be able to reach both men and women. Finally, I think to get to my last question is, what would you say are some of the capacity building needs for cities to ensure gender is embedded in the climate action plan? One is that in the digital age that we live in, I think everything is driven by data. Cities cannot address what they don't understand, so they need to be able to have enough data to be able to understand what climate change issues they have and how are they impacting both men and women. So so that they are then able to then address those issues appropriately. And there needs to be training of people holding climate action plans and everyone in the cities as well. And I think previously mentioned there needs to be training both on understanding climate change and understanding gender, and then how those two interrelate. What we have learned at Sustainable Energy Africa is learning from what cities learning from each other. So some cities are more advanced than others. Some cities already have plans where they've included gender in the action plans. So cities that haven't done that yet can learn from other cities, and I think that is particularly important. And equally, I think as any city, I think Lewu herself will tell you, one needs a champion in the city, someone who will drive this this type of messaging. So cities need to have that kind of person who will drive to ensure that gender is addressed within climate action plans. And I think lastly to say that it needs to be a commitment from the mayor all the way to all the staff members in the cities. The cities cannot address climate action plans if the mayor and the directors don't agree with it. So it needs to be a commitment within the city to say we will address gender issues in our action plans. And finally to say that we can only do this and provide capacity if there is budget in the city. So there needs to be a budget set aside to provide training for cities to be able to understand the seriousness of gender inequalities, particularly around climate action plan. That would be all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. I think you're hitting on very important, issues for cities. But before we move into questions, I just wanted to reflect on some of what you're saying. And I think of the most importance is that when you're talking to people, it's very important that you're not talking about their heads. It's very important that we engage people in their language, in their groupings, observe the structures that exist in that particular context, and follow the requirement of engaging with those people. But also the fact that for cities to make a mark on climate action planning, the political will is the thing that is of the paramount importance. If there is no political will, it means there won't be budgets allocated, there won't be programs flowing. Climate change will not become a major priority to the extent that it's required of the entire organization to find a way in which they can make a contribution. And with that, I want to thank you, Tlengiwe. But I want to now open for the next 10 minutes for a question and answer session. I'm going to ask all the speakers to switch on their videos. Also, for the next session, I've had there's concerns around the fact that we are all speaking so fast. The interpreters can't keep up with us, so we need to pace ourselves as we are delivering our speeches, and talk a little bit slower so that the interpreters can follow. So at this point in time, as we engage on the question and answer session, can I ask all the speakers to switch on their videos? Speakers that just spoke now, Alice, Flair, and yourself, Tlengiwe. Hello.
Yes, we are here.
Okay. Is everyone on screen? I can only see you, Alice. I saw Tlengiwe when you switched on. I could not see. Can somebody confirm that we have everyone?
We are everyone.
Okay. All right. Can we open for a Q&A session? I haven't seen much coming through the chat. Okay, I haven't been paying attention. I'm going to invite the participants also to verbally engage in a Q&A session. If there's anyone, can I see hands? If not, then I'm going to read through some of the comments that came through. Okay, now it's a better plan. I think my view was actually not showing me the full benefit of what I need to see. So, Emma Desmond, if I'm correct, is saying, could the panelists recommend existing training designed for local government or city decision makers for integrating gender in climate change planning? And then she says, many thanks from Emma, okay, in the UK. So how would we respond to Emma's question around designing a particular training for local government or city decision makers? What has been the experience, maybe from the UNCCC, what has worked, or AFD, SIA? You all have interfaces with local government and cities. What would you recommend? Okay, can I start with you, Flair?
Thank you, Lebu, and thank you, Emma, for the question. Actually, it's one of the areas where I think there is a need for more targeted training materials, because a lot of the focus has been on national processes. And there are some that I'm aware of, but not, but they're quite specific for particular cities or in particular urban situations. So I think this is definitely an area where more targeted specific training would be really useful.
Okay, great stuff. Alice, do you have a perspective also?
Yes, I agree with Fleur, and I would like to say that maybe extend the question a little bit and say that what can be done as well, and I think would be great would be to have exchange of expertise and experience between the different local municipalities, the different local governments, the different cities, to see what has been done elsewhere and how we can learn from each other as well.
Great. Anyway, you touched somewhat on this, if you can elaborate also. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, I think I also agree with with the two speakers. We definitely, I think, exchange between cities is important. But equally, I think within bringing in gender, bringing experts that understand climate change issues and experts that understand gender issues. I think Alice did say that there seems to be a lack of that. There are people who understand gender issues and there are people who understand climate change issues, but then there aren't people who actually understand how those two work together. So I think cities need to engage because we need those people to come in and assist. But equally, I think cities should have those people in-house, so that they need those people in the house so that they continuously facilitate that sort of training, because outside training is expensive and cities can only afford so much with their given budget. So they actually need to put aside money to hire someone who will address those issues on a continuous basis, I think. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it's great because it all goes back to that political will, budgets being made available, the champions, but also I think each one of you made a point to say capacity building is the thing that we need to pursue. So can we just engage a little bit more around the delivery of this capacity building training? We are saying there has to be a champion. Because we can't always be paying consulting fees for this kind of support. But how do you run an ongoing capacity building session? Because you see, with capacity building, I think it's very dynamic because you start from a point where you are informing people about the basics of what you are trying to achieve. And then it morphs into other things. But as you are running this thing, there is potentially new people coming in that you need to engage with. Can we just share a bit of perspective in that regard? I'll start with you, Shengwe, again. There's a bit of an issue with my audio. Now I don't know exactly. I'm short of putting my whole head inside the screen. Is it getting better at all?
No, I can hear you clearly. Sorry, I saw a question here also from Caroline saying, does this training in cities does this mean trainings in cities should focus more on the female staff? No, it should. When we talk about gender, we are addressing both men and women. So it should be both men and women. In fact, I would say there should be more men in that training than there are women, because women already understand the struggle. So men need to be in the table to understand the issues that women go through. So I would say it's a thing of where you need both men and women in the training. Can I come back to your question? I'm still thinking about it. Sorry.
No, it's fine. As you do that, I want to also reflect on something that you spoke about around segmenting the men from the women, so that you can get the true lived experience. Because sometimes you might find that people are not able to engage, especially when you look at social networks within which people exist. They might not be able to engage when the men are there. But if you put the women aside,
Yeah.
the men aside, and you pull everything together at the end, then you might get a lot more information. Alice, can you reflect on my capacity building question?
Yes, I think I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier. I think the idea is to build the reflex for everyone at any point of time to think about gender. It should not be something that you add at the end of a document because you have to speak about gender. I think it really needs to be integrated from the beginning, and it should be a reflex. It should be something you think about from the beginning, because gender inequality is not only it's not only women who are suffering from it. Of course, they are the most affected by it. But when we speak about gender inequalities, we speak about also gender stereotypes that affect men and masculinities and everything that make us live in a society that's today unequal. So yeah, I also want to go back to the point of bringing men into the picture. I think it's really, really important.
You mustn't feel, ignored. But if you can just give me a snippet as we move to the next session, your last words on this topic.
I would just agree with everyone that we can't leave this only to women to sort out, and that that gender, we're talking about systems and power relations and who's involved in decision making and who's at the table and who benefits and who doesn't. So it absolutely is a core element of making decisions about changes to our economies and societies. This is not an add-on.
Well said. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you at this point in time. We're going to move to the next segment of this agenda. And I need to introduce Lwede Tayu. She's the director for transport in Maputo Municipality, Mozambique. And as you join us, I need to just thank you profusely for availing yourself today. I know it's a holiday in the country. Happy Maputo Day to you. And I also need to just indicate to the rest of the participants that Lwede will be speaking in Portuguese, so you must switch on your interpretation at this point in time. She will be taking us through a couple of questions, and here we have just an outline that says, please tell us about gender sensitive mobility project. The other one is, what are the lessons from the project that other cities can learn from? And in light of COVID-19, what do you say have been the project benefits? So Lwede will be taking us through all this. I urge all of you to switch on your interpretation.
Muito obrigada, boa tarde, espero que todos estejam a ouvir-me perfeitamente. Muito obrigada, Lebo, por esta oportunidade de estar aqui a falar sobre aquilo que é a experiência de Maputo, neste caso
of Maputo is in the gender questions, issues related with related to mobility. If I speak very fast, please give me a sound so I can lower it. And my question in these points, I want to make the accent about
do gênero na mobilidade e os resultados, lições e perspectivas que nós temos a nível do Conselho Municipal de Maputo. Próximo slide, por favor. Esta imagem é a imagem da nossa cidade, que felizmente hoje completamos 133 anos de existência como cidade, como município, Só em termos gerais, assim, uma caracterização, nós temos uma área de 346 quilômetros e 1,5 milhão de habitantes. A seguir, por favor. Nossa intervenção para aquilo que é a mobilidade urbana inclusiva para os componentes de gênero é muito nova. Começamos de forma específica e muito direta a trabalhar nas questões de gênero e mobilidade há sensivelmente 3 anos, e de lá para cá temos vindo a desenvolver algumas atividades que já têm gerado alguns resultados bastante positivos e benéficos para aquilo que são as nossas atividades. Próximos slides, por favor. Próximo. O grande objetivo daquilo que é a nossa mobilidade inclusiva, baseada no gênero, é garantir a transversalidade, a equidade, a segurança e a comunidade de todos, com especial enfoque para a mulher. Estas 4 imagens que nós temos aqui mostram basicamente o contexto do nosso sistema de transporte. Estas fotos foram tiradas antes da pandemia de Covid, mas é possível nós notarmos longas filas de espera, a disputa para o acesso ao transporte público, que deixa a mulher numa situação de vulnerabilidade. O próprio transporte também circula superlotado, que também é uma situação de vulnerabilidade para a mulher. Na primeira imagem à direita, nós podemos ver uma estudante que teve que recorrer à janela do autocarro para poder sair. Então, estas são mais ou menos uma explicação fotográfica daquilo que nós temos como cenário de vulnerabilidade e exclusão da própria mulher para o transporte público. Próximo slide. Desde há 3 anos para cá, o Conselho Municipal de Maputo tem estado a realizar periodicamente a Semana da Mobilidade Sustentável, que não engloba somente o município de Maputo, mas toda a área metropolitana, onde entidades públicas, privadas, ONGs, a própria academia e a sociedade civil são chamados para discutir sobre todas as complexidades e vertentes da mobilidade urbana, do transporte público, da acessibilidade, e as questões de gênero estão sempre candentes, estão sempre debatidas e amplamente discutidas. E alguns passos, como eu referi anteriormente, já foram dados, e próximo slide, e algumas realizações também. Entretanto, estamos muito cientes de que pouco ainda foi feito e nós ainda pretendemos alcançar muito mais em relação a estes aspectos de inclusão e transversalidade de gênero. Próximo slide, por favor. O nosso objetivo principal, como já foi mencionado, é garantir um modelo de mobilidade sustentável, equitativo, inclusivo, seguro, centrado não somente no transporte público e na forma como as pessoas são transportadas, mas igualmente no espaço público, na disponibilização do espaço público seguro e acessível para as mulheres e a camada socialmente discriminada. Próximo slide, por favor. Próximo slide, por favor. Uma das primeiras realizações da nossa intervenção em relação à mobilidade de gênero foi a concepção de um desenho piloto de um espaço de paragem, não só a paragem, como toda a área envolvente, e para a implantação deste projeto piloto, nós fizemos um estudo muito profundo e apurado daquilo que eram os modelos de paragem anteriormente em uso no nosso município, num total de 14 modelos anteriormente existentes. Vimos todas as vantagens, as desvantagens, os pontos fortes e os pontos fracos para a concepção do modelo mais adequado, que fosse seguro, que fosse acessível, que fosse visível, que disponibilizasse toda a informação necessária para que as mulheres e as raparigas estivessem num lugar cômodo e seguro e confortável. Próximo slide, por favor. Próximo slide, por favor. A seguir. Este é o modelo de paragens que nós instalamos. A imagem está um pouco desfocada, mas a primeira imagem à esquerda mostra-nos o abrigo, que é um abrigo totalmente aberto, tem um banco e só tem 4 apoios. Este tipo de abrigo foi estudado e para que a pessoa, estando na paragem, sentisse cômoda, sentisse segura, conseguisse ver os movimentos ao seu redor e tivesse em segurança. Contrariamente aos outros modelos de abrigos de paragens que nós tínhamos, que tinham paredes sólidas, que deixavam zonas sombrias e zonas descobertas, que no período noturno geravam focos de assalto, focos de insegurança e violência para os passageiros, em especial para as mulheres. Entretanto, esse espaço foi estudado para além daquilo que é a visibilidade, para além daquilo que é a sinalização. Temos dispositivos de segurança que permitem que os veículos não transcendam para o espaço dos passageiros, porque um dos grandes problemas que também temos a nível do nosso município é o estacionamento de veículos por cima dos passeios. Então, no nosso modelo de espaço de paragens, temos os pilaretes, que são dispositivos para proteger toda a área de circulação e toda a área de espera dos passageiros. Próximo slide, por favor. Com base em todo o estudo que foi feito para a implantação do primeiro, ou do modelo piloto de paragens e espaço de paragem, conseguimos conceber, neste caso, um caderno de procedimentos. Este foi um dos primeiros grandes feitos das nossas intervenções em relação à mobilidade de gênero, porque neste momento temos um caderno de procedimentos para a instalação de paragens que são seguras e universalmente acessíveis. E este caderno de paragens, para além do município de Maputo, que é o nosso, esteve imediatamente à frente do processo, os municípios todos à volta da área metropolitana de Maputo aderiram e fazem efetivamente o uso deste espaço, deste instrumento, como o instrumento guia para a instalação de espaços de paragens e abrigos nos seus territórios. Isto é para dizer que aquilo que é que é a experiência do município de Maputo, não está a servir somente para o município de Maputo. Estamos a conseguir extravasar aquilo que são as nossas fronteiras de delimitação espacial e trazer aquilo que são as boas práticas para os nossos municípios vizinhos. Próximo slide, por favor. Esta é uma das outras ações que realizamos muito recentemente, que é a campanha de gênero sobre o lema "O assédio não é passageiro". Esta foi uma campanha de bastante impacto, onde o objetivo principal era sensibilizar sobre o respeito e os direitos fundamentais das mulheres e das raparigas no espaço público e no transporte público. E para a nossa alegria, esta
Interjection, Mayra.
Desculpa?
Acho que tens que ir correndo um bocadinho mais rápido.
I was saying you
Okay.
left with 1 minute. If you can start wrapping up, please.
Ok. Next slide. Tá bem, obrigada. Para frente, por favor. Realizamos também inquéritos nas paragens e terminais, sobre os perfis de viagens, comportamentos em situação de insegurança dentro do transporte público e não só, e como as pessoas lidam com este tipo de situação. A seguir, por favor. A seguir, próximo slide. E deste trabalho que foi feito com os inquéritos e com as campanhas, nós produzimos o caderno de procedimentos para a promoção da transversalidade de gênero e a diversidade na mobilidade urbana. Este caderno foi apresentado muito recentemente, agora, na 3ª semana da mobilidade, em agosto. Próximo slide, por favor. Fizemos o levantamento preliminar de uma rota de transporte, daquilo que são os pontos de paragem, aquilo que são as terminais, para verificarmos os pontos de insegurança. Foram identificados 3 pontos de insegurança que serão trabalhados para a melhoria da segurança dos passageiros, e em especial das mulheres. E foram também diagnosticadas como causas ou aspectos que levam à insegurança, a falta de iluminação pública, existência de áreas desapropriadas, áreas com aglomerações, locais de moradores de rua e etc. Próximo slide, por favor. Próximo slide, por favor. Das lições que nós temos é que as mulheres têm um perfil de viagem muito mais complexo, realizam muito mais interligações, gastando deste modo muito mais dinheiro que os homens com transporte público, mesmo em situações de estarem a realizar mesmos percursos. Próximo slide. E a mulher precisa efetivamente equacionar muito mais fatores para decidir se realiza uma viagem ou não, e estas questões todas condicionam muito aquilo que é a mobilidade da mulher. Próximo slide, por favor. Temos as questões de cultura, as questões sociais que influenciam bastante para aquilo que é o processo de exclusão das mulheres e raparigas no nosso contexto e na nossa sociedade. Próximo slide, por favor.
Mayra, I need to put pressure on you to wrap up. How many more slides are you?
Sim, só em termos finais, assim, para dizer aquilo que são as nossas perspectivas de ações de seguimento, aumentar a consciência sobre os abusos e violências contra a mulher no transporte público e no espaço público, definir protocolos de tratamento e atendimento a casos de violência e abusos, realizar um estudo mais aprofundado de toda a rede de transporte para a identificação daquilo que são os pontos de insegurança e posteriormente fazer um trabalho interventivo em cada um destes pontos. Próximo slide. Gostávamos também de formar aquilo que é a tripulação, neste caso os cobradores e os motoristas de transporte público, para que sejam os intervenientes primários em situações de abuso, em situações de assédio e insegurança dentro do transporte. Próximo slide, por favor. Próximo slide. A relação da experiência da Covid-19 no âmbito do projeto trouxe-nos grandes valias naquilo que é a junção e a sinergia com os nossos municípios vizinhos e irmãos. Estamos, nesse momento, desenvolvendo um programa de combate e prevenção à pandemia na área metropolitana toda. E tantas outras atividades que têm vindo a ser desenvolvidas, como a desinfecção dos veículos, a desinfecção dos passageiros, o rastreio, a medição de temperatura. Todas as atividades estão a ser desenvolvidas neste momento para prevenção e combate àquilo que é o Covid-19 no nosso território. Acho que já não me resta muito mais tempo. Gostava de agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui a partilhar estas ações que nós temos estado a levar a cabo. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Loida. As you've seen, with the other panelists will have a question and answer later on. I want to swiftly move to Grace for her Grace will be talking to us about so this is Grace Karanya. She's the Director of Environment, Energy and Natural Resources in Kakuru country in Kenya. She will be talking to us about two things. What initiatives does your country have with regards to gender, and what have been the successes and the challenges thereof. Then she will also talk to us about what are her country's capacity building needs with respect to gender mainstreaming. Over to you, Grace. To all the participants, all the bios for all the speakers are online. So if you have an interest to learn a little bit the speakers, you can just go into the resources that are.
Okay, thank you, Lebo. It's a great opportunity to be here today. As I said, my name is Grace from Kenya. I work with the county government of Nakuru, Environment, Energy and Natural Resources, and also on climate pillar. And I'll go straight to the topic of today, whereby the leading questions were about on what are the initiatives that the Nakuru city have put in place in terms of gender mainstreaming. And one of those initiatives we have already a fully fledged gender department that deals all gender issues in the county. We have also formulated a gender mainstreaming policy and a bill. They are already in place. We have appointed gender focal persons in all sectors of the county to ensure that gender issues are taken care of in all sectors of economy in the Nakuru County. We have improved on the gender inclusivity, which is part of what is our constitution is stipulated. Then we have incorporated the climate change action plan, which is in place, and policy, plus the bill to ensure that gender activities and also issues are being taken care of. On the success, we have been able to have what we call the gender disaggregated data, especially on the sector of health. We have also been able to include the service provision through all forms of works of life, that is inclusion of gender in terms of both men and women, and also youth and people living with disability in the project identification, oversight activities, and also to the final implementation. There is also what we have been able to ensure that we have specific project for particular groups to ensure that they all have equality or equity in also attaining or getting into implementation of projects to improve their livelihoods. We have mainstreamed gender into our climate policies, as I had alluded earlier, and also in our county integrated development plan. We have also involved the gender in terms of natural resource management, climate change issues within our county. The challenges that we may have, it's inadequate funding. We have not been able to have assess the risk and vulnerability of our gender. Then we have inadequate know-how in terms of maybe many people will agree with me that when people talk of gender, they really speak of women as the issue of women are the people most are affected by the issues of climate change. And when it comes to issues of gender, most of them allude as if we are talking about women here. But when we talk about gender, it's a very crucial issue and it has to be taken care of all around because we are talking about people from all kinds. That is women, children, people living with disability. So it has to be very important. Then we lack or we have low commitment and implementation of gender responsive climate policy and action at all levels, which attribute to a lack of systematic gender mainstreaming. So I'll go to the second lady question, whereby what are the considerations of climate, of gender in our climate action? Our Article 59 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 has established the Kenyan National Human Rights Equity Commission, whose mandate is to promote gender equality and equity, generally to coordinate and facilitate gender mainstreaming in national development. So that is our key or the paramount law that's guiding our country. So it has given us the forehead to ensure that we mainstream gender in whatever activities that we undertake. Also in the session paper number 2 of 2019 of National Policy on Gender Development, which requires all the county government to ensure that they have all the gender issues being mainstreamed within their county integrated development plans, and also ensure we allocate adequate resources to implement gender equity in our programs for empowerment purposes. We also have a responsive budgeting in adopting the budget cycle. And it's also tell us to identify and implement programs targeting gender equality and women empowerment. We are also guided that we're supposed to collect and disseminate count gender data, and also which will help in report on policy implementation and the county level. To make it more transparent, as a nation, we are supposed to have 3 things being mainstreamed up to the grassroots level. One of it is HIV/AIDS. We also have gender mainstreaming, and also we have climate change issues. So we take it as a very important aspect within our policy making. And also in the session paper number 5 of 2016, where we have a national climate change framework policy. We also have a national climate action plan that's of 2018 to 2022 that give us an opportunity to ensure that climate change response is equally beneficial to both men, women, and enhance gender equity and equality. We are supposed to also undertake systematic gender analysis on its climate change response through collection and utilization of gender disaggregated data, including in relation to budgetary process. Also, we are supposed to ensure that marginalization and vulnerability arising from gender disparities are addressed at the stage of climate change responses. So with all that, we are supposed to ensure that we put proper mechanism to enhance participation in the youth in climate change governance and position them to take advantage of the available opportunities. Undertake analysis, we mean special needs, and ensure that the planning and climate change responses mainstream participation and protect to persons with special needs. So those are the issues that we have been able to put up in place. Then we are in the same session paper, it also include on the issue of environment and natural resources to ensure that we have a secure and sustainable environment for all, which means gender are taken care of. We are supposed also to integrate and mainstream gender perspective in peace and security process for a stable and secure environment. The other question, I'll go to it quickly. What are the capacity needs that we in respective to gender? As we are saying, we have the mandate of ensuring that gender mainstreaming issues are taken care of in all walks of life, and also in the processes that we are undertaking as a county. And taking into consideration of that, there are various challenges that come with mainstreaming. One, not everybody is aware of what is happening. When you talk of gender issues, some will say that it's taken care of, because when you talk of men and women, it's like all issues are taken care of. But capacity building on gender and climate knowledge is a very key area that we would like maybe to have been looked into, to ensure that we have the necessary capacity knowledge, and also institutional strengthening on the same. We want to engage people in policy making actions, engagement which focuses on capacity building, knowledge management, to divert participation, research and development in decision making. We also, another gap is where people are not really sensitized on gender mainstreaming, especially on our sectors. We would like all people who participate in these planning issues to be able to be sensitized properly, so that can be able to ensure that we address and integrate gender-related knowledge into policy making, implementation. Then we ensure that we have monitoring and communication strategies and materials. The other one, we need to be trained on data disaggregation, because as I had alluded earlier, we only have what we can call disaggregated data on health sector, and gender issues are intersectoral, or they are cross-cutting issues. So we need to equip all people with this knowledge. Then training on reporting on gender outcomes. We have to do what we call monitoring and evaluation on all aspects that we do. Then we improve the access and professional information, as well as advocacy. Then last but not least, maybe I would say we should incorporate climate change measurement, reporting and benefit measurement. Those are the issues maybe we, depending on the time that I've been given, that's my take for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, for an insightful delivery of your program, what you in Kenya. We don't have much time for questions. I think we will get an opportunity to do another poll, and we'll use that poll to reflect on what would have been your questions and answers. So we can go now. Whilst we are voting, the next step will be a video that we are going to just view. We have sort of run out of time, but it's a video from the Barefoot Women's Association in Sierra Leone. So I'm encouraging all the participants to take time to watch this very important. I think on a lighter note, as we are voting, the fact that we are now running out of time, it's probably a gender thing. Somebody once said, as women tend to use more words in a day compared to women. And it's actually, I think this situation bears testimony to that fact. We are able to use a whole lot of words to express ourselves. So we'll switch to the video once the polls are done.
This women's association started in 2004 to 2005 has a backyard garden and a soap making project led by Nancy Kano, our current Barefoot Women Solar Engineer Farm Manager.
But we say agriculture, it is bien. Work across the country, we don't see who say then they say woman own cashew farm, we don't see them. Plants are no more, but we don't know value. We don't know waiting because we can't get the plant cashew no more. They begin the play time, then they make something like they write in name. Now you know what we know about cashew. But we can't go one conference. We go see waiting cashew. What cannot say me sector for plant cashew.
That family decided to contribute to us 2.8 square mile land covering Boli land, inland valley swamp, and upland. And so because the area they gave us was a completely depleted area, we decided to say cashew nut will be the best crop to reclaim the depleted land that they have given us. So it's more of grassland, savanna, prone to fire. And so because we want to correct that by using an economic activity, we decided to go into cashew nut farming as our pilot project. So in 2016, we did the cashew nut as a pilot project where we have planted very close to 200 acres of cashew nut. Some are beginning now to produce fruits, and we're expecting a better harvest this 2020 year. And so in the process, we've got our farmhouse there to train more women in farm technology, and then we have covered 45 villages, but we are currently working with 15 villages directly in our agricultural farm.
In our mentor, where they try for mentor, we for make us do farming. So this Boli land, we want to develop this Boli land, not to rest no more. We want plants to rest now. We want plants all type of vegetable in the country.
And Chief Solar Engineer of Barefoot Women Solar Engineers Association at Contaline in Sierra Leone. I received a loan worth 300,000 yuans worth of agricultural seeds, basic local hand tools and soap making, and soap to generate income as post-war recovery program from Sunshine Christian Fellowship Austria and Sanjit Bonka Roy of Barefoot College International, Tilonia, India, using future youth projects at Allentown, Freetown to monitor our work. We paid the loan, trained 33 villages in vegetable garden and soap making, and opened an account for ourselves so as to operate independently and transparently. In 2007, Mr. Sanjit Bonka Roy came to Sierra Leone unnoticed to evaluate our progress. Only 2 of our villages did well out of 15 villages that received the loan. My village, Contaline Koya, and Moyan Mibana Kois, where my colleague Fatu Kuroma came from, were automatically selected to go to India to be trained as solar engineers for 6 months in the same 2007, and returned with laurels of 52 solar PV home light systems to demonstrate to our villages that indeed we have been trained in solar technology and that we know how to do it. And we have also provided solar lights for 36 homes in Contaline and 16 homes in Moya Mibana, all of Koya Chiefdom, Port Loko district. Today, We are now 22 Indian-trained barefoot women solar engineers, 33 male youth trained as solar technicians, and 260 women trained as solar engineers at our Barefoot Women Solar Training Center, drawn from 190 chiefdoms in Sierra Leone, and trained of trainers not only in solar technology, but in farm technology enshrined, and also other livelihood skills to generate income for the rural women to own their business, gain respect, participate in leadership, and contribute to national development instead of just being dependents. In upholding and consolidating our background, the only woman-led cashew nut farm at Kontawusi was a land donated to us by the Bundu family, who happened to be my parents, in 2016. But the entry point was cassava farm from 2014 to 2016. Today, we have close to 200 acres of cashew nut farms with no better or modern agricultural training, with my barefoot women with unskilled labor and moral support in 15 villages who have formed women cashew nut groups. Knowing Sierra Leone as a man-controlled world where women-led farms and institutions are treated as poor risk even where loans are unavailable, not to mention equipping and financing us where we are treated with liberty as weaker vessels. Now, we have started with crude methods and tools and have established a solar training center which focuses globally, established one of the only women-led cashew nut farms, only seconded by Marie Bob Kande, cashew nut farms in Cambia, where all the rest of the other cashew nut farms are done by men. My appeal is for all and sundry to come on board to support us with tools, machinery inputs, finance, and farm technology training, specifically focusing on cashew nuts, as all the women coming from the 190 chiefdoms are ready to be trained, equipped, and devote their energy and time in cashew nuts, even as they go along with their solar technology, as energy is the key in processing, packaging, branding, and marketing of finished products of cashew. I am convinced the answer is here to solve our challenges in our quest to consolidate and expand our women in cashew nut farming in our 16 regions in
This is good work by the food program. At this point in time, we now are closing down the session. I would like to invite all my panelists to switch on their videos as I close this session. I want to thank everyone that has stayed on the call, participation. I've seen some resources that are shared in the chat. I really appreciate this kind of interaction that will be able to take this very important topic of embedding food. I want to thank all my panelists, all of you individually. Alice Jan, I will learn how to pronounce your surname. Alice Freya Newman from the UNC. Alice is, as you remember, the AFD. She was coming from a finance perspective, sharing programs that they are doing to support the gender issues. Freya is from the UNC. As you can remember, she did share with us the journey around the focus on gender mainstreaming from a Shani Way from an NGO perspective was able to share with us some of the work that they have been doing with communities, but also shared with us her lived experience as a young girl, how the gender issues impacted on her learnings. Noedo did share with us the Maputo experience around, you know, around the transport sector issues, you know, how women are also impacted negatively in the sector. Grace also shared with us her issues around the whole chain around the policy makeup of what governs their climate action planning under Kenya. So with that, I want to also thank you for your participation in the discussion. I also want to thank Hamza for making the session, you know, possible. As I indicated at the beginning of the session, that they are a very important party and ally in making the session very important. In terms of the polls, you are aware that we have 2 polls, and the voting results are out. We ran quickly into the video, but when we look at the polls, there were certain questions that were asked. The first one was saying, have you received an introductory training or orientation on gender issues? And the options that we had was a yes, no, not. Most of the people said yes. So we have the training. The question is, what do we do next? And then the next poll was had a question: which of the gender mainstream related topics below are you interested to receive training in? There were 5 options: introduction to gender, gender mainstream and climate change action planning, gender and climate change adaptation, gender and energy access, gender assessment and data. Most of the polls went to both gender mainstreaming in climate change, climate action planning, and gender assessment. Those 2 were voted the same, they received the same amount of votes at 67%. So I'm going to use the poll as just the closing to say, in taking this process forward, Italy is wanting to put together a capacity building program that is targeted, that is actually also influenced by the outcome of this session. And you have heard from your side, from my reporting, that the voting is quite clear. A lot of people have received training, but also in terms of interest on further training, there is a clear undecided vote around gender mainstreaming in climate change planning, and also gender assessment and data. One of you, I think it was Alice, no, it wasn't Alice. It was Flame that said data is very important. So until we have data, we can't really assess what is the next steps. So I think I'm going to close it at that. And with that, I want to thank everyone and wish you all a successful 2018 in the in the week of COVID. But for us to continue doing this very important work, the women issues are very important. Yes, we shouldn't leave the boy child behind, because if you look at poverty in imperative, you also don't want to cause a new dynamic going forward. You need to look at the context within which people are. And if it's from a poverty point of view, you need to make sure that as you capacitate the kids or the children, we have a balanced approach to that. But in terms of the current pressures around how do we deal with climate change, who gets mostly impacted by climate change, who gets to respond when there's no water in the house or when the house is flooded, we all know that it's the women in the house in those cases. So we need to make sure that we put programs in place that are able to capacitate and alleviate the pressure that women are finding themselves in. And thank you very much. The session is closed. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.